Hey everybody, uh, thanks for coming to my talk, The Art of Lurking, Effective C2 Channels. Call out Jay Connor, marketing guy, does awesome work there. He made the title slide here. So, who am I? I am Corey Overstreet. I'm a senior security consultant at RedSeer. I've got 15 years of IT experience doing the help desk, break fix, that kind of thing. All the way up to pen testing, red teaming, all that good stuff too. I got a few letters after my name. Play around with a few different instruments, and most of the electronics in my house don't really do what they were designed to do. I like to play around with them. Anyway, so what is this talk? So this is for internal red teamers, blue teamers, that kind of thing. Mainly, most of the talks that I make, I'm trying to make something that I wish I had had when I was coming up, just to kind of explain some of these topics and kind of give you a roadmap of things to look at. But for the blue side, I wanted to kind of just show some of the things that we abuse very regularly. We get on debrief calls all the time where they're like, man, we didn't know half this stuff. Like, and then you come in year over year and you're showing us new stuff each time. Like, what can we be doing in the off season to kind of, get prepared for the next time this comes along, or even if we have a real incident where they're abusing these things. But, as always, I like to say, Jeff McJunkin said this, but I've seen it attributed to other people too, like Lee Christensen. Everything's stealthy until they're watching for it. So, just remember, even though these are all public knowledge, just because the blue team may know about it doesn't mean that they've necessarily implemented defenses. So, just kind of a quick rundown. I'm going to talk about some of the considerations that we think about when we're trying to set up a C2 channel. Kind of talk about some of the most common ones, which is HTTP and DNS. But then I'll kind of run through some of the other ones too, and some of the things that we abuse that kind of incorporate that, but may not necessarily fall into HTTP or DNS. And then I'll kind of give you some resources to look into as well. So, as far as considerations go, let's get down to basics. A C2 channel, C2 stands for command and control. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get some kind of software running where we can send a command in and we can receive the output. We need some way to be able to remotely control our target and then use that so that we can start spreading throughout the network. But we also want to try and find channels for that communication that are completely undetectable or undetectable as long as we fly under the radar. So, what makes a good C2 channel? We try to abuse protocols and services that are very common. Kind of going back to that quick overview, the HTTP and DNS are the most common. But we need something that will also allow us some kind of storage and retrieval of custom data. We need to be able to send in something different each time, possibly, and get back what we're requesting. It also needs to be repeatable, hopefully. We don't want to just send in a command and then we're done. We want to be able to get the output back, and we want to continue to do that for as long as possible. And again, we want to blend in with everything else going on because we don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. We don't want the defenders immediately noticing that something weird is going on the network. And that's why, I put this in red at the bottom. The context matters. And we'll get into that more as we start talking about the different services, but you definitely want it to match what's going on. If your environment is highly corporate, you don't want to be talking to Discord servers or Twitch or something like that. You want to be talking to something that makes sense for that corporate network. So, what are the common roadblocks that we run into? First and foremost is network monitoring. Some of our clients have the user entity behavioral analytics, or UEBA. This is where administrators will get a baseline of what's normal in their network. What do our users normally do? What hosts are they normally talking to? And that's internal and external. But that can be that can almost be a silver bullet if you start doing a lot of strange things and kind of give them alerts. Another huge thing that we run into a lot is egress filtering. There certain domains may be blocked, certain services, certain ports, and we'll cover that a lot more here coming up. Another thing is anomalous communications. Um, you know, when you see a host in your network in finance all of a sudden talking to the domain controller, that can be a huge red flag. And that's and not just in a way of authentication, but like pulling massive amounts of data or talking to services that the users don't normally talk to. And then the excessive communications. So I have actually been burned a couple times on a more covert assumed breach type test based on the fact that we were sending out DNS lookups constantly. We could not get out through HTTP, so we had to use DNS. And they started looking and realized that we were doing just a massive amount of DNS lookups every day, and that's how they spotted our C2 traffic. So, kind of in the same line of that is you want to also look at the tempo of your communication. Like, is this a smash and grab kind of thing where it doesn't matter how loud I am because I'm going to be out of there in a day or so anyway? Or do we need to stay in there for 3 months? So we have to go slow and steady and try to keep it, as out of sight as possible. Also, the time of day. So I have actually tested clients who were in completely different time zones. And because of that, I had to change my hours of operation because I needed to blend in with the network traffic for the region that I was testing. So, a lot of times too, when they start trying to do attribution for like an APT style attacker, they'll start looking at what hours are they actually operating. And a lot of times that can give you an idea of what region those attackers are sitting in, or at least what region they're trying to portray. Another big thing is jitter. So this is built into a lot of modern C2 frameworks. But what this does is if you were calling back to your C2 server every 5 seconds on the dot, that can be anomalous enough to start getting detected. So you can build jitter in where it'll randomize based on a certain range of either calling back, every 2 seconds this time, 10 seconds the next time, 4 seconds after that, and so on. So, and that can be adjusted as needed so that you can make it way harder to detect that that's beaconing behavior. But you want to try to be as asynchronous as possible too, with the jitter and with how you operate with your commands, so that you're not always constantly sending back huge amounts of data. But that depends on the protocol too. So it all depends on how you're sending that back and how you're sending it in. So, like I said, we'll talk about a lot about HTTP. Everything speaks HTTP now. If you were to pull up NetStat on your Windows machine, or if you were to look at all the network connections on your Linux or Mac machines, even your phone, you'll see that there are a ton of connections out to the internet at all times, talking pretty much all day long. And the reason for this is they're checking in for updates. The apps are running in the background, that kind of thing. So this is the most common thing we are going to use because we will slip into all of that traffic that's going in and out of the network. Um, when you're trying to think about how you want to call home, you can do direct IP address or you can do domains. Now, IP addresses will stick out like a sore thumb. It's very uncommon for something to be calling back directly to an IP address. They would be calling back to some kind of reputable domain, especially for that app. But at the same time, I have had tests where the web filters were just shutting us down, could not get around it, couldn't get a categorized domain quick enough to get the test going, called back over IP address directly, and it went right out like there was nothing there. And because of that, the client realized that that was actually a pretty big blind spot in their egress filters. Another thing is plain text HTTP versus HTTPS. Now, the HTTPS is encrypted, but a lot of egress filters have SSL inspections, so they can see what's going in and out for the most part anyway. But with that plain text, it's also increasingly rare, so it may stick out more. But again, your C2 is probably going to be encrypting the packets when it sends out to that plain text HTTP. It should be. So, that can be enough to get around a filter as well. And in some cases, the HTTP will still allow domain fronting, which we'll talk about later, to the reputable services that you're trying to front through. So when you're setting up your C2 as well, you want to think about setting up a malleable profile. So what I mean by that is instead of having to use the built-in requests that are being sent back and forth over HTTP, you can actually go in and modify all of the HTTP headers, the body of the request, even what it's requesting when it calls out to the C2 server. A lot of times what we'll do to try and blend in is we know that they're using some third-party service. So we'll interact with that service ourselves and record the interactions with Burp Suite, and then you incorporate that into our malleable profile so that now our C2 looks like it's also talking to the same thing. Not the same domain, but at least it's web traffic that looks similar. And that can lend a lot of credibility to your communications. So if they're seeing those kinds of requests a lot, especially if you can sit inside of the same hosting provider or something like that as that third-party service, a lot of times that's enough to just slide right past. But what you want to look for too is what you're actually requesting with that malleable profile. If your profile is requesting the same GIF file, 40 million times a day, it's going to stick out a little bit. It's going to make it seem like this is anomalous traffic and something worth looking into from the defenders. So another huge pain in the ass is the web proxy or filtering. So there's so much goes into what is allowed and what's not. So when you look at the classification of the domain, they're going to look at the domain reputation, which is, has this ever been classified as malicious? Or has it ever been classified as something that doesn't need to be coming into a corporate network? You've got the domain categorization. This is where they categorize the content of the site for things like, is it gambling? Is it social media? Is it, is it some kind of file sharing site? These are things that they want to look at to make sure that, especially if they have data loss prevention or something like that, they want to block certain categories of sites. And then on top of that, they want to look at the age. They want to see, has this domain been hosting content? Has it been around for a while and gained the reputation that it has, or was that reputation established 3 days ago when we started the test? Along with the categorization, a lot of times we try to get medical or finance categorized domains because the data that would be going to one of those two categories falls under regulations like PCI or HIPAA. And because of that, a lot of system administrators don't want to retain that data for their records because now they have to be compliant when they're storing that data. So I have actually had tests where we managed to get a health categorized domain that wasn't being blocked at the egress filter. And because of that, the blue team saw almost nothing that we did the entire time we were there. So in those cases, like that was just a test where we had to prove that we could get out. But in those cases, that is a huge blind spot for some companies that they don't realize they have. Another thing that we have to get around is SSL or deep packet inspection. This is where custom certificates are on all of the endpoints. And because of that, the egress filter can actually go in and decrypt all that TLS traffic and see what's being sent and do further analysis on what's going on. So it is something to be aware of, but it is not always, the solution that will stop us from getting out. Another thing is website content. So let's say you've got Cobalt Strike, you're hosting your thing over HTTPS. I have had tests where, because the egress filters couldn't reach out and find a valid web page on my listening service, they wouldn't allow the C2 traffic out. So what I figured out was, if you can go to a website and use an add-on for Firefox and Chrome called Single File, and what it'll do is it'll take a web page, it'll compress it all into a single HTML file, and if you host that as an available file and you name it just /, web browsers will actually fill in the rest for the index.html. And so you can actually host a web page on the same port as your C2 server, and it'll make it look at least a little more believable, especially if the blue team goes in and starts trying to see what exactly this thing is that they're calling back to. Again, it's not perfect, but it helps you blend in. And then one more thing that we don't run into very often, but God, it's a pain when you do, is the TLS fingerprinting with JA3 or JA4. Basically, what this can do is, most of the C2 frameworks, programming libraries in general, are all using the same libraries to call back. And if there's one that gets abused a lot, like a particular library for a particular programming language, if it's getting abused a lot by malware, this can actually fingerprint that just based on the TLS hello message that goes out when they're trying to establish a tunnel. And based on that, there are profiles that will catch certain kinds of malware just when that's configured correctly. Again, I don't run into that very often, but on highly, highly secured networks, I see it pretty regularly. So I mentioned this earlier. What exactly is domain fronting? So domain fronting is a technique where, let's say I wanted to host some content for my legitimate service in a content distribution network, or a CDN. So when I make a request to that website, the request is actually going to an edge router for that CDN, and then, the CDN is then routing that request to my host sitting within their network. But what we can do is we can actually change the value of the host header, the HTTP host header, to match our real target. And we can make requests to sites that are hosted within that CDN, and then the edge router will route our request to our host, even though we requested something that was hosted within that CDN. So, for example, the Fastly CDN used to allow domain fronting. You could make requests to like Reddit.com, and as long as you were also hosted in the Fastly CDN, you would change that host header to your actual domain name, and it would route that to the real site. Now, there are proxies that can detect domain fronting. They look at that host header and make sure that it matches the host that was requested in the server name indicator for TLS. And in those cases, it can actually change it on the fly to make sure it goes to the site that was really being requested. So that is kind of the way you fix that. But again, domain fronting is kind of going away. It's not necessarily easy to find services that you can still perform it through. I wanted to include this meme. I try to keep the memes to a minimum, but I thought this was pretty apropos. You got Google Cloud, which used to be used for domain fronting. You've got the AWS. You used to be able to domain front through CloudFront. And in those cases, a lot of times what happened was services started abusing it too much. They started getting complaints from their customers, and they had to turn it off. The most recent of which being Fastly. I think they turned theirs off last year. But we used that quite a bit until it went away. So another channel that you can use, and this is over HTTP, are WebSockets. So WebSockets are basically a free reign, just open two-way street where you can do duplex communications and you can write any kind of protocol you want that will operate over that WebSocket. A lot of web apps use this nowadays when they want to perform communications that aren't just openly being sent back and forth through TLS. This can also be asynchronous, but a lot of firewalls, if it's too asynchronous, will actually just close the connection. But it is a server and client relationship, just like most C2 servers. So if you can set up a WebSocket channel and write your own protocols to occur over that, you can abuse that pretty easily to get your communications up. But like I said earlier, it's all developer implemented. So you can set up whatever kind of message frame packet you want to set up within that socket and then basically use it wide open. Now, again, TLS inspection, those kinds of things, we'll be able to see what's going on, but you can, further obfuscate it if you want, if you like. So one of the things we use the most, though, are trusted web services. So pretty much everything out there nowadays is talking to some kind of API. And this is all happening over HTTPS. So if you can also just slide in there and use the exact same thing, now you're gaining the reputation of that trusted web service, along with being able to use the apps that are already sitting on that target's machine. So what I'm talking about here is I'm talking about things like Slack, Teams, Dropbox, you name it. It's whatever they're using. There's probably someone out there who's already written a C2 for those platforms. The other good thing besides the reputation is there's a high volume of interaction here on a daily basis in a legitimate scenario. So now you can pretty much operate wide open as well, as long as you're still staying within the normal operating hours of when someone would be using it. But now I will say too, and this has happened to me more than once, bot behavior can be detected by that third-party service, and it is a terms of service violation. So they have no problems cutting you off as soon as it's detected. And there's nothing worse than being 2-3 weeks into an engagement and realizing, oh crap, they canceled our account. So just some examples real quick. You can use redirectors like AWS CloudFront or Azure Front Door. We regularly use these. Basically, you just sign up for an account. You set up one of these redirectors, and because of that, you now gain all of the reputation of that redirector. So as far as the victim goes, they're only making a connection to CloudFront or Front Door. From that point, it then gets routed back to your service, and there's no attribution at that point other than the parent company knowing who had access to that. Also, you can look at third-party enterprise services. So we had a SkillBridge intern come in. I mean, calling him an intern is kind of an injustice. Alex came in and he wrote us a third-party external C2 for Cobalt Strike called Graph Strike, and this used the Microsoft Graph API, which is what M365 basically runs off of, but a lot of other Azure services too. And we can communicate directly over that. And because it's all HTTPS and we're going out to Microsoft, I mean, we're pretty much in there because, you'd be hard pressed to find companies that completely shun Microsoft products in their networks. Works really well. I will say if you just grab it straight from GitHub and try to use it in your environment, though, it probably will get caught. So you will have to to work with a little bit to try to get around any kind of detections. I've also seen proof of concepts using GitHub and GitLab using like the workers, the actions, that kind of thing, basically posting code. So if you're in a developer environment, that's also golden because that's going to be very, very normal traffic going back and forth. This is pretty much just a whole page of things that we've either used or played with. There's a lot of chat apps, Slack, Discord, Microsoft Teams. These are basically built for C2 because you can set up bots to join a channel, talk back and forth, and as long as you have some way of parsing that and turning it back into usable information, you can do a lot with that. Same with file storage. File storage is also ripe for this because you would be sending large amounts of data to these services. So I have personally used Dropbox and OneDrive, but I've seen proof of concepts using Google Drive as well. Again, you have to be careful what you send, though, because these companies can look into that. And if they start realizing that it's being abused, or if they start detecting something malicious that's being sent back and forth, it's pretty easy to shut you down pretty quick. I've seen proof of concepts using social media, like posting to Twitter, Reddit. I've never actually used it on an op, but I have seen where the proof of concepts actually work pretty well. Both of those services also allow bots, or at least Twitter used to. So you could, so the bot behavior on their part isn't something that necessarily sticks out. Instagram and Facebook, I've just seen proof of concepts again, never played with that much, but I thought it was interesting to add just because a lot of companies still allow social media out because they have people that use it throughout the day. Another couple interesting ones that I saw when I was looking into this, I saw one using YouTube where it was actually posting the C2 stuff through steganography within videos and then using the comments for follow-ups to that. And they would just post, some kind of encoded or encrypted value in the comments, and it could parse that just based on the Google account. Google Calendar is another one, just because that's a pretty inert thing in most other cases, but speaking to a Google service over and over and over again does not stick out. And then finally, I thought this one was kind of funny, was VirusTotal. Once you have an API key, you can upload and download from there pretty regularly, as long as it's not matching on something that's already known to be malicious. So we talked about HTTP. Let's talk a little bit about DNS. Now, I'm preaching to the choir when I tell you what DNS is, but it turns readable domain names into IP addresses. This is pretty much how the internet works. So most of the time it's over UDP, but it will fall back to TCP if it can't get out in using UDP. This is very, very rarely firewalled. Most of the time, if we're getting caught on it at all, it's just because it's being monitored for abnormal behavior. But again, very, very, very commonly we can get out using this, and we completely bypass any egress filters when you use something like that. So the most common, you're going to see the A records. This is where you're actually looking up, google.com and turning it into an IP address. You can do it through both IPv4 and IPv6. Where you're going to get the most data to be able to send in and out is through text records. But again, there's still limitations on how big those packets can be. But you could do CNAMEs, you can do mail exchange records, name server records. There's really too many to list here, but in general, you can set up your C2 to be an authoritative DNS server, and now all of those DNS requests will come back to you, and basically it's all encoded in the subdomain that you're trying to do a lookup of. So DNS is painfully slow, but there are ways to get out if DNS is being blocked. You can, so DNS is a plain text protocol. To the security community, to answer this, started creating DNS over TLS over port 853. A lot of firewalls block this by default. You have to open it up manually. So because of that, another innovation that the IT community came up with was DNS over HTTPS. Cool thing about this, HTTPS is probably already allowed. So you can you still have all the same restrictions. You actually have a little more overhead because now you're going through TLS as well, but you still have room within those packets, and a lot of times that is enough to get out. And if you are doing the HTTPS, your tempo of communications will still look normal because it's HTTPS traffic, it's normal web traffic. Guy on GitHub's Austin Hudson, I think his screen name's SecIdiot, wrote a user-defined reflective DLL loader for Cobalt Strike called Titan Loader. Basically, what this did was it had all of the public DNS over HTTPS services built into it. You picked one, and what would happen is now your Cobalt Strike can talk or can make the DNS queries over HTTPS to one of those public services, which will then look up the authoritative name server, which is your C2 server, and it'll send it on to where it's supposed to go. Kyle Avery, a guy who worked at Black Hills for a little while, he came up with a better version of this, where now it'll actually cycle through all of the services. So now you can get out through through any of the public services that were listed within the original Titan loader, and it because those are going out, and because none of the public services will have the records that you're requesting, most of the time your traffic will make it back to your server. So again, I've kind of hit on this a few times, but DNS has a lot of limitations. So in UDP, you've got 512 bytes max. That's including all of the things that the legitimate DNS has to have as well. So your window for data storage is pretty small. Now TCP, TCP can go higher, but again, there are still limits to how much data can be sent back. Also permitted characters. So there are characters that are not allowed in a domain name. And because of that, we pretty much have to base 64 encode whatever we're sending in and out. And because of that, now the data has gotten even bigger. Base 64 increases it by what, like 75% or something crazy like that. So you've already taken what data or what little data space you had and just made it that much bigger. So again, that is something that we run into. DNS is extremely slow, but if it's all you got, I mean, you know, a win's a win at that point. The other thing that can shut you down is I have seen organizations where they have an internal DNS server, and that's the only thing that's allowed to look up domains. It will not forward out of the domain if it's something that's not reputable or something like that. So because we can't get out to our DNS server to send those requests, we pretty much get shut down because of that. So some other common C2 channels that we use is SMB, server message block. This is like for file shares. We're not using this out to the internet though. Now Server 2025 is going to allow it over QUIC, which is awful. But more or less what we're using this for is inside the network. So all the communication goes through pipes. And it's not just for file sharing. SMB is used for quite a few things, especially in Windows networks, but it is common in Linux and Mac as well. So this is extremely rarely allowed out to the internet. In fact, that's probably a finding if you're a pen tester. But this is something that we use very commonly once we've established a foothold. So we would use this also during lateral movement. So let's say I get a foothold, I've got it calling back over HTTPS. And I've got an attack path that'll give me access to 30 more hosts. I don't want 31 hosts all calling back to my C2 server over the same web address, calling for the same GIF file, you know, and basically communicating all day long. So what I'll do is after I've landed on a machine or a couple machines, I'll then chain to an SMB service on another host after I get execution on there. And now I've got a chain of hosts that are all communicating back over that HTTPS channel. And the good thing about that is it lowers the amount of requests and abnormal requests going out to my C2 server. This is especially useful too for hosts that can't talk to the internet or accounts that can't talk to the internet. So let's say you escalate to a system on a host. A lot of times, system or computer objects in general can't talk to the internet. They can't go past the web proxy because they can't authenticate to it. They're not set up for authentication. So what we'll do is, whatever we're doing to escalate the system, but we need a beacon in that context, we'll execute an SMB beacon and then just connect from our lower privilege beacon to that to give us that beacon in the higher context. Another thing is a lot of domain controllers or database servers are not allowed to talk to the internet. And this is a good thing. But how are we going to get a beacon on that host if we need to? We'll set up an SMB thing chained to it, and now we have our beacon on that host where we can operate in memory as we've been doing. So another interesting channel is mutual TLS. So in most cases, when you're looking at SSL, you've got a private key and a public key. All of your clients have the public key, and your server or your main host has the private key. Um, with mutual TLS, both sides have a public key and a private key. So both sides have their own private key, and they can ensure that they are talking to the host that they are supposed to be talking to. The cool thing about this, as far as C2 goes, you can set up per implant key pairs. So now, if one implant gets burned, they can't just automatically decrypt all the traffic for everything else too. Now, again, there could still be attribution, and the domain can get shut down, but at least they can't see what's going in and coming out. This is also very common in zero trust environments because they can verify who they're talking to back and forth. It's very difficult to position yourself in between these hosts. So that's why it's pretty common in zero trust environments. But the C2 that I've used it the most in is Sliver. It's a pretty mature C2 where you can basically set up MTLS to look like it's HTTPS traffic, but you still can avoid a lot of the TLS inspection just based on the fact that the private key pair is going to still encrypt what's going in and out. So another pretty common one is SSH or Secure Shell. Pretty cool trick taught to me by one of my former coworkers was if SSH can be set up on any port. So you can set it up on 80 or 443. And if there's not protocol restrictions within the firewall, you can now get out over SSH. I was in a pretty secured environment. I was doing an unrelated test, like a web app test, and it was like working in a library. It was just, you could hear a pin drop in that place. So I wanted to listen to some music so I didn't fall asleep. And so I texted one of my coworkers and was like, "Hey, can you set me up a droplet and put SSH on 443?" And sure enough, it worked for about an hour and a half till the sysadmin realized what I was doing and he shut me down. But I was just proxying everything over 443, and because they didn't have a protocol restriction, 443 was just pretty much wide open. But you can also just set up SSH to run completely over HTTPS. That is a valid, legitimate use for SSH. There are admins who can log into a web portal and establish SSH shells to their servers using nothing but a web service. Now, the problem with setting this up for C2 is an idle connection for SSH over HTTPS will often get shut down by firewalls because they're trying to free up resources for these constant connections. So you may have to keep some kind of heartbeat going to keep it alive. But the other cool thing about SSH is you can use it post-ex as well, or post-exploitation as a network foothold. So you get your beacon up and running, and then you use SSH to call back, and now you can just tunnel all your tools. It's been built into Windows since 2018, but Mac and Linux have had it for way longer. So it is a very common, ubiquitous tool. So when you use SSH, you can basically use it as a proxy. You can do a port forward or a reverse port forward. This is a one-to-one connection. So I'm saying I want to connect to this service on this port from this port on my machine. We use this pretty commonly when we're doing like an assumed breach and we have to tunnel through a box that's calling back to us, back to some infrastructure we own, and we'll RDP over that, or we'll establish some kind of connection over that. But you can also set up a SOCKS proxy. This is a one-to-many, so I can set up a port on my machine, and whatever I request through that port on the other end, it will go out to whatever it is. Now, some SOCKS versions, like version 4, doesn't do automatic DNS lookups, but SOCKS 5, you can do DNS over the SOCKS proxy as well, making it pretty easy to use. And you can also use SSH for remote file copy. So I mentioned him earlier, our SkillBridge associate, Alex, came up with another cool technique called SSH delivery, or shishing. Not a huge fan of the name, but it is an awesome technique. Basically what this is we would send some kind of shortcut or some kind of command execution, like a script file or something, where basically once the user runs it, it will establish an SSH shell to a box that we have out on the internet, and it'll either remotely copy over a payload, which will get executed later, or it'll just go ahead and execute at the time. It all depends on what kind of attribution you need to be getting around. But the cool thing about this is you completely avoid mark of the web. So mark of the web is basically how Windows knows that this came from the internet, and it's something that needs to be paid attention to. So in that case, like if you're trying to get a macro doc past email filters and all that, SSH is the way to go, because none of the restrictions that would come from being identified as a file from the internet will apply to a file that's copied over by SSH. So another interesting one is ICMP or ping. So the typical packet size is 64 bytes. It can go up all the way to 64 kilobytes. Now, you make some massive packet like that, with a huge amount of random data, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, but I guarantee you, there's probably a handful of people in here now that could probably use ping out of their network without any issues. So it's very commonly used by threat actors for exfiltration as well. It's slow as hell, but it works. And because it's very rarely monitored or blocked, you can get a lot in and out using that. There's a lot of proof of concepts out there for C2 frameworks, or at least a remote command shell. But one that I played around with here is PingRat. Basically, you set up a server out on VPS, and this will establish a tunnel using nothing but ping, which is pretty neat. Definitely worth taking a look at the code there. So I wanted to include these as well. There's a couple projects. There's one called Living Off Trusted Sites. So basically, much like the living off the land binaries and scripts, or LawBAS, this is set up in a table where it's categorized as, could I host a file for download? Could I perform phishing through this? But the one we're interested in here is CNC, or the C2. These are ways to do command and control, and they have examples when you actually click on the site. That will explain to you how to set up, or at least how to abuse this, through getting command and control. But this was made by Mr. Docs of Maldev Academy fame. This is one of the main authors of that Malware Dev Academy. Another one that I found recently is Living Off the Tunnels. So these are other sites like Ngrok or Cloudflared, where you can create tunnels through trusted sites. And much like the redirectors that we talked about earlier, these are sites that the user will only see the connection to something like Cloudflare. They won't actually see where that traffic's going at the other end. Another one in particular to point out is the dev tunnels there. That's a Microsoft service where you can do SSH tunnels from within I believe, and you can come from the outside as well once the tunnel's established. But this is a legitimate service that Microsoft offers. But there's a whole bunch of stuff on there, definitely worth a look. Both living off the tunnels and living off of trusted sites are definitely something to look into. For the defenders, though, there's a lot of work to be done because some of those sites are very commonly used in corporate networks. So, in conclusion, your C2 channel needs to make sense for your environment. I know that sounds obvious, but it's something that some of our or some of the junior testers I've worked with in the past just they're not necessarily thinking that way when they're setting this stuff up. HTTP network traffic is one of the most common types, but it's also the most scrutinized, and for good reason, because just about everything speaks it nowadays. Abusing those third-party services work usually really well, but the service providers are watching for you to be abusing it, so just be careful, especially if you need to stay in there for a while. DNS is slow, and ping for that matter, but it can be a huge blind spot that maybe you didn't know about until today. So a couple of quick resources. If you're looking to just kind of play around with C2 frameworks or at least test them in your environment, Sliver and Havoc C2, these are both free out on the internet, and they are very mature. They are definitely things that threat actors are using nowadays, and they're things we use too. If you're looking for kind of a toy C2 to play with, there's Skate Park and Skate Rat. These were made just kind of as a proof of concept by Slydog, but we've actually played around with this just at RedSeer just to kind of get an idea of what goes into developing your own C2, and you can actually modify it and make it do things that you want it to do for more modern evasion. Another cool repo to check out is the C3. What this is from the With Secure Labs. Basically, they have set up external C2 connectors for Cobalt Strike that go through Slack, Dropbox, Discord. God, there's a bunch of them. Now, the only bad thing about that is you would have to go in and figure out how to set it up so that it doesn't just run wide open. Like this is basically like interactive shells, so that can look pretty rough. But they have instructions for setting everything up, and it does work well. I have had clients where that was the only way I could get out of the network, and it does work. If you're interested in kind of seeing the thought process that goes into a C2 framework, this 0x Rick link at the bottom, he basically takes the Skate Park and Skate Rat and explains why those things work and why they're there. And he also talks about how to either modernize it or how to kind of implement your own functions within the C2. So I'll open it up for questions here in just a second, but I did want to say we've got a Discord. Feel free to jump on there, ask me a million questions. We got a bunch of people on there that'll answer questions. We also do a thing called the Wednesday Offensive. What this is every Wednesday for half an hour, we have people from the InfoSec community come on and talk about whatever it is they're working on nowadays. And we do not record it. We don't put it out there anywhere. There's no slides. All mics and cameras are hot. So you're welcome to ask any questions that you want to whoever's talking that week. Also, if you're interested in seeing the slides, there's a link to a PDF of the slides. I promise there's no malware in there. That'd be a crappy thing for a security company to do. But I think the only thing that's missing from that, at least today, is the living off the trusted sites and living off the tunnels. But I'll get that updated either today or tomorrow. But with that, anybody have any questions?